A hatchet is shot by police.
A male was armed with a hatchet and screaming.
The SIU is now investigating after the man was shot by an officer in a West End plaza. We'll have the latest from the scene. Plus,
everybody's scared about the situation. Nobody knows what will happen.
An East End elementary school is closing its doors following an outbreak of COVID-19 and a walk-off by several teachers. And
over 13 million possible fatalities. So this is an incredible seizure.
Fentanyl, crystal meth, heroin. Toronto police seize millions of dollars worth of drugs in 2 major busts. Good evening, I'm Kelda Yoon. Toronto police have called in the Special Investigations Unit after an officer-involved shooting in Mimico. A 30-year-old man is in hospital with serious injuries.
There were numerous calls from multiple callers shortly after 4 p.m. The calls were a male that was in possession of a hatchet and screaming in the area of Lakeshore and 24th Street.
The SIU confirming tonight that a police officer shot the man. In a statement, the agency says 1 subject officer and 1 witness officer have been designated as part of their investigation, and they are urging anyone with information to contact them. Thorncliffe Park Public School will be closed for at least a week as Toronto Public Health investigates dozens of COVID-19 cases among students and staff.
While we did anticipate that we would have additional cases here at the school, currently we have 26, it's obviously concerning when you get that number in a school.
In a letter to parents, the principal of the school says all students and staff are dismissed until at least December 9th. That decision coming on the same day 3 teachers at the school walked off the job, claiming the school was no longer a safe work environment. It was the first school to participate in voluntary asymptomatic testing. Thorncliffe Park is one of the neighborhoods in the GTA that has been hardest hit by this pandemic. The Premier is promising more details on vaccination plans tomorrow. That's after the federal government released more information today. It says the first vaccine could be distributed across the country as early as December 14th. At Queen's Park, the other parties today hammered Doug Ford for not telling Ontarians more. Lorenda Redekop reports.
A last-minute podium switch 15 minutes before the Premier's news conference. It made it in time, and Premier Doug Ford promises the vaccine rollout plan will make it too.
What I can guarantee the people of Ontario, we will be ready.
He blames the federal government for the questions that still remain.
We need to know, in no uncertain terms, what vaccines Ontario will receive, how many of them we will get, and when exactly they will arrive.
Today, the opposition criticized Ford's government for not providing details on its rollout plan. Alberta's premier has said its first vaccines will arrive by January 4th.
What we see is them scrambling at the last minute, trying to figure this out when other provinces, other countries have a real plan in place to address the vaccine rollout and ensure that people are going to get those vaccines in a timely fashion.
Another question, who's on the province's task force led by retired General Rick Hillier?
So if you're going to get a general, let people know who the Army is, who's helping them, what their job is.
The Premier says those answers are coming tomorrow.
In addition to General Hillier, we're bringing together the best and the brightest for our COVID-19 vaccination task force.
The health minister says they're still finalizing the paperwork for members on the task force. The government says it's been working on its vaccine plan for months. As for why more details haven't come out already,
we want to make sure that the task force has the option to consider the work that's already been done, make their final recommendation to us before we then go forward and make announcements to the public.
General Hillier has repeatedly said his team will be ready by the end of the month. The Premier warned the initial vaccine supply will be very limited. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
Tenants' rights groups say ever since the provincial ban on evictions ended in August, more people are being forced to leave their homes. And they're calling on the government to step in tonight. As Natalie Nanowski explains, they fear a wave of evictions in the coming weeks could leave people homeless over the holidays.
York South-Weston has one of the city's highest rates of COVID-19, and now it's seeing some of the highest eviction rates too.
So last month alone, our community of York South-Weston has seen 170 eviction hearings. 170 in just 1 month.
Chiara Padavani says many people she's spoken to have lost their jobs or are essential workers supporting entire families.
They're the same people who have been celebrated as frontline workers, as heroes during this pandemic, but aren't being given the respect or the rights that they deserve during this pandemic.
The government of Ontario will make sure that no one gets evicted. We stand by that. And we're going to make sure we take care of those people.
That was back in March, and that promise ended in August. Recently, legal clinics say the Landlord and Tenants Board has been plowing through eviction hearings.
The figure we heard was 7,000 cases being scheduled between November and January.
All of the hearings are conducted online, and legal groups say that isn't fair since those facing evictions already have limited resources.
We've heard of people having to conduct hearings from payphones and sitting out in their car in the parking lot and wondering whether their minutes were going to run out before they get a chance to present their side of the story.
Groups are calling for another eviction moratorium. Instead of waiting for the government to step in, one group in Parkdale is going directly to its rental management company, hoping to figure out a long-term solution.
Opening discussion on rent relief as opposed to unbearable repayment plans, and an end to rent increases in Metcalfe buildings in the neighborhood.
The Landlord and Tenant Board told us that it still needs a few more days to figure out exactly how many evictions it's scheduled between November and January. And the provincial government hasn't responded to whether or not it's willing to put in a second eviction ban. This has many groups worried that people will find themselves homeless this winter. Natalie Nanowski, CBC News, Toronto.
In order to increase Toronto's housing supply, the city is considering a vacant home tax.
This report recommends moving forward with the implementation of a vacant home tax that would commence starting in 2022. Staff estimate that at 1% of a property's value, it would raise $55 to $66 million a year that we could then invest in things like affordable housing initiatives.
A report on the tax will go to Toronto's Executive Committee next week. The city says determining how a home is deemed vacant will be part of the development process, but residential property owners would be required to make a declaration each year as to the occupancy status of their home. If approved at the Executive Committee, the report would go before City Council later this month. Just 5 months after they were installed, the City of Toronto has announced it is ripping out the protected bike lanes on Brimley Road.
There were no consultation that occurred with respect to the community. It was temporary in nature, responding to COVID. It was also determined that towards the end of the year, there would be a review, and the data and the information that was being collected by the city would be used to make a determination as to whether or not the lanes would stay intact or they would be removed.
The temporary lanes were installed in July between Kingston Road and Lawrence Avenue East as part of active TO. Now, the lanes got mixed reviews. Cyclists said they felt safer, but drivers complained the lanes created more congestion. The lanes cost approximately $160,000 to install. The city expects to spend about $80,000 to remove them. Cycle Toronto released a statement saying this is 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that the minor inconvenience to drivers is being prioritized over the health and safety of all road users. The city says the lanes will be removed as soon as possible. To several major drug busts now, Toronto police have seized more than 140 kilograms of illicit drugs worth millions of dollars, while Durham Regional Police have seized more than $2 million in cannabis and cash as part of their investigation dubbed Project Sorrento. Dahlia Ashry has the details.
Crystal meth, cocaine, fentanyl, heroin. Toronto police say altogether $17 million worth of drugs were seized.
Over 13 million possible fatalities. So this is an incredible seizure with an incredible toxicity and the ability to have fatal outcomes.
2 men are now facing a total of 19 charges after 2 separate drug raids in the fall. One was in Vaughan, where a 23-year-old man was arrested and charged with 3 counts of trafficking.
The total street value of that particular seizure is around $8 million. Arrested and charged was Oya Jabebi Ife Shimoni.
Another man was arrested in a raid in Mississauga.
Bayan Abdullah Jadid, 26 years, who resides in Edmonton.
Police say the residence was being used as a fentanyl cutting lab.
Officers seized a large quantity of drugs, drug paraphernalia, firearms, and a large quantity of Canadian currency.
Jadid is now facing 16 charges, including numerous counts related to possession and trafficking.
The potential for our most vulnerable people falling to the substances you see before you is tremendous. So the mere fact that we've been able to remove these from the streets, I think, is a great impact.
Meanwhile, a Durham Regional Police investigation dubbed Project Sorrento recovered millions of dollars worth of cannabis and cash. The searches sparked by a citizen complaint.
The complainant advised that illegal drugs were being sold to youth in the community. The East Division Community Response Unit began an investigation, and after approximately 2 months, they arrested several suspects and executed 2 search warrants at 2 separate residences.
One resident was in Bowmanville, the other in Mississauga. Police seized over $1.9 million in cannabis, THC extract, cannabis vape pens, and edibles. $150,000 in cash was also found. 4 men and a 17-year-old woman are facing numerous charges. Dahlia Ashry, CBC News, Toronto.
Another person has died after a police-involved shooting in Kawartha Lakes last week that left a toddler dead. The 1-year-old boy's father died in hospital last night. The tragic sequence of events unfolded last Thursday. Police were called after the boy was abducted by his father from a home in Trent Lakes. A short time later, police spotted the man's pickup truck. When they tried to stop the vehicle, it crashed into an OPP cruiser. Officers fired on the pickup, seriously injuring the father. The boy was found dead in the vehicle. A gun was also found in the pickup. The SIU says it's unclear who shot the boy. An OPP officer who was injured remains in hospital in stable condition. Well, to the trial of Alec Minassian now. The Crown today arguing that the defense's key witness, a forensic psychiatrist, left out important pieces of evidence in his report. The psychiatrist has testified that Minassian has severe autism spectrum disorder and that he wasn't thinking rationally when he carried out the Yonge Street van attack. Trevor Dunn has more.
It was a grueling, full day of cross-examination for the defense's most important witness, the Crown picking apart the testimony of Dr. Alexander Westphal and his conclusion that Minassian's autism severely impaired his mind. Completely, utterly, totally irrational is how Westphal described Minassian's thinking around the time of the attack. To prove it, Westphal points to when Minassian told him one of the reasons he followed through with the attack was simply because he had already started planning it and didn't want to back out. In his report, Westphal writes Mr. Minassian held himself accountable after booking the van and felt as if he had to go through with it. But today the Crown revealed that at one point Minassian appeared to say the exact opposite. In an interview with Westphal, played in court, Minassian says, "I felt a strong desire to want to do it, especially towards the time of the rental, but I didn't really feel forced or compelled to do it. I didn't feel that I had to do it." Prosecutor Joseph Callahan then asked the witness, "Where do you reflect the passage we've just heard in your report?" Westphal, "I think Mr. Minassian had a strong desire to do it, that he didn't feel compelled to do it, and I think that's reflected." Callahan, "I'm going to suggest to you, you only included facts that fit your narrative. How does your report accurately reflect that he told you, I didn't feel forced or compelled to do it?" Westphal, "To start, it doesn't say he felt compelled to do it." Callahan, "Other than where you say he felt that he had to go through with it?" Westphal, "I don't see that as the same thing as compulsion." In his report, Westphal also said Minassian's communication and social skills are like that of a child's. If that was the case, the Crown asked, how did Minassian finish college, perform well in job interviews, and negotiate a dishonorable discharge from the military? In each case, Westphal said he stands by his findings. The trial continues tomorrow. Trevor Dunn, CBC News, Toronto.
Film has this really great ability to be able to pick you up and lift you up and take you to places you've never been.
The 9th annual Toronto Human Rights Film Festival kicks off today. My interview with founder Gilad Cohen about what's in store this year and the power of documentary. That's coming up. The St. Lawrence Farmers Market will be back indoors this Saturday. Vendors were forced to set up outside last weekend after the market tent was closed due to the COVID lockdown. The city now says it reviewed the province's restrictions and determined the market is permitted to open as an essential food service. COVID-19 precautions, of course, will be in place when the tent opens between 5 a.m. and 3 p.m. on Saturday. And a bit of a rain-snow mix tonight with some wet snow to come in the overnight. Let's go to our meteorologist, Colette Kennedy. Colette, more December weather coming our way.
Thanks, Kelda. Well, you know, we've got a system that's going to kind of sneak through here. It's not going to be like the last snow event that we had, but I do think it's going to make the morning commute just a little bit slower because of some wet roadways. So if you're planning right now, maybe set the alarm a little bit earlier and allow a little bit of extra time. So overnight, some wet snow developing. It'll be fairly light in nature, and I'm going to show you what the accumulations are going to be looking like. It does turn into a mix, especially for the city and many parts of the GTA, quite frankly, as we get into the afternoon hours because of where the temperatures are going to be at. And then even by later in the afternoon, I think we'll see the skies breaking up, the clouds breaking up a little bit. So we won't hold our breath on that, but I do think we'll get a peaks at some sunshine later in the afternoon. But some chilly days coming up on the weekend. Our daytime highs running below seasonal. That's trend is still in place. So we'll talk about that too in just a moment here. These were the daytime highs today, though. Check out St. Catharines, 7 degrees. Windsor, it took a little more time for that cloud cover to drop in. I think that was probably fine with everyone. So up to 6 degrees through there, and even Kingston with a milder temperature as well. But this is what's going on, all right? There's a system that's sneaking up the eastern seaboard, which luckily we're not going to have to worry about, but another one kind of tracking in from the north. And as this comes and drops down, eventually that energy is going to all go towards the eastern seaboard. But as it's passing through, picking up some moisture from the lakes, and we get into this bit of wet snow or even a bit of a mix, especially closer to the lake shores, both the lower Great Lakes and up towards Georgian Bay. As it moves through, I do want you to see that kind of eastern parts of the GTA, and then further east into eastern Ontario and north is where it sticks around a little bit longer. And that's why I've got some slightly higher accumulations there. And here's that cloud cover later afternoon trying to break up. I know the sun sets at like 4:40, so it doesn't maybe give us a lot, but you'll likely get a little more of that sun coming in for southwestern Ontario as the day wears on. Into Saturday, a northerly flow could bring a few flurries back down towards southwestern Ontario, but we should stay with just kind of a variable sky, even though it's going to be some cooler air coming into the GTA on the weekend. So that snowfall potential to the north and northwest could be enhanced a little bit here over towards Oshawa eastwards. I think it's probably going to be more so east or north in Oshawa, and otherwise it's some sloppy wet roads as most of it's going to be melting away, so just a few centimeters likely for the city itself. Your overnight temperatures in southwestern Ontario right at freezing, and then just above trying to get you some of that sunshine into tomorrow afternoon. A quick look here for the Golden Horseshoe with those temperatures. You see if they're at freezing or just above, it's why we're talking about this being kind of a messy mix in terms of it moving through. And then those overnight lows, those are pretty close to seasonal. Those daytime highs, that's a little on the cool side for the weekend, but it should be a nice weekend even so, Kelda.
Good to see some of that sun. Thanks so much, Colette.
The weather is brought to you by Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test, so it runs. It's hard to stop a train.
December is Human Rights Month, and kicking off today is the 9th annual Jayu Human Rights Film Festival. The festival was founded in Toronto 8 years ago by Gilad Cohen. This year it's going virtual because of the pandemic, and for the first time everything is free. I spoke to Cohen about this year's lineup and the power of film in revealing often hard truths. So you started this Human Rights Film Festival 8 years ago now, in 2012, and back then it was started as the North Korean Human Rights Festival. What inspired you to do that?
So back in 2008, I took a day trip into North Korea, and it was one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. I don't think we have enough time to get into the details of it, but when I went back to South Korea where I was living and I started researching about North Korea, I became horrified about what I was learning about. My background is Jewish, and so a lot of what we grew up listening to in our house, stories of concentration camps and the Holocaust, really reminded me of what was going on in North Korea. And so I became obsessed with North Korea. I started working with North Korean refugees in Toronto and in South Korea. And despite all the successes that came with that work, the one thing I could never do was convince my family to care about it as much as I could. Nothing got through to my mom. And then one day I was at her house and I put on a documentary about North Korea and she broke down. So I thought, what would happen if I could fill a room full of people and do the same thing?
But there are only so many documentaries on North Korea. So in 2014, the festival expanded to showcasing films on global human rights issues. This year, the festival is showing 15 films, 7 features and 8 shorts.
So our opening night film is called Objector.
You have one chance to get to know the army, and that's when you join it.
It dives deeper into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the story of a conscientious objector, an Israeli woman who forgoes serving in the Israeli military to become a Palestinian human rights activist. We're also screening Maddie the model.
I have the philosophy of if someone wants to do something, they can do it.
Heartwarming documentary about Madeline Stewart, the world's first professional runway model who has Down syndrome. The film is shot over many years and it shows the challenges and the successes for Maddie in trying to bring more diversity and equity into the modeling world. We're also screening Indianara on December 6th. Indianara is a fierce leader. She's a trans activist and she fights for LGBTQ rights in Brazil.
There is a Q&A after each screening, and it's not just film this year. There is a poetry slam, a comedy night, workshops, and a keynote address from Cyrus Marcus Ware, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto. All of this available virtually, free of charge. What do you hope people take away from this year's festival?
You know, it's been a really tough year, not just because of the pandemic. I think of George Floyd. I think of Joyce Echequan. I'm also reminded of Devontae Miller. And when I think about the pandemic and those injustices, it's really hit certain communities in disproportionate ways. And I mean Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities. And for us at our organization, it's really angered us. So the hashtag for this year's festival is Give a Shit. And it's for people who are just as fed up as we are. Film and the arts in general, too, allows you to reimagine a sort of world, a better world, a more equitable world that you want to live in.
The festival runs until December 10th, which happens to be International Human Rights Day. And that is our show for you tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you back here tomorrow night at 11. Have a great night, everyone.